Welcome, everyone, to what we hope will be a very special event, the Carbon Medalists Roundtable. So I'm Robert Hurt, and Peter Thrower and myself will be moderating. This is a panel discussion, and I'd like to start by thanking the panelists. These are our carbon medalists for being so generous with their time to make this possible. I'd also like to thank our conference leaders, Lubisha Radovich and Mauricio Terrones, for having the concept for this unique event and also the leadership to make it happen. It's a remarkable feat to bring together this group of people in one place at one time, and they must have wonderful powers of persuasion, or they have large sums of money. I don't know which. But we would like this event this afternoon to be a friendly and personal discussion. So like having a group of Nobel Prize winners and carbon medalists in your own living room. And to that end, we have created a synthetic living room here on the stage. And I hope you appreciate the upholstery, because this would be called charcoal in the business. So this is a carbon-themed living room, and it's cleverly designed to make the panelists feel comfortable. So they'll talk, and they'll tell us their secrets, how to win the Nobel Prize, how to win the carbon medal. And we want you to be comfortable as well and to participate in these discussions. So before we invite our distinguished panelists up into our carbon living room, I'd like to say just a few words about the history of the carbon medal for young people, for newcomers to the field. Years ago, our society had a strong awards program. We have the SGL Award, still given out today, the Patinos Award. We have a variety of student awards. But in 1996, when the Nobel Prize was awarded, landed really in our field of carbon materials, people recognized the need for another very special distinction. And this led to the concept for the carbon medal in 1997, given to Harold Kroto, Robert Curl, and Richard Smalley, right here at the Penn State meeting. It was 19 years ago, almost to the day. Now this medal is for, and I'll quote, outstanding contributions to the discovery of novel carbon products or processes. So unlike some other awards, this award is about major discoveries. And as such, it's only been given a few times. After the initial awarding, it was given to Millie Dresselhaus in 2001. And then in 2004, it was given to Sumio Ijima, Don Bethune, and Morinobu Endo for their work on carbon nanotubes. And now 12 years later, here back at Penn State, with almost perfect symmetry, it's being given to Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov for their work on graphene. So Mauricio and Lubisha have managed to get a majority of the former medalists for this very unique event, and we're going to talk today about the future of carbon materials. The format will involve statements by each of our medalists to begin with, followed by a question and answer session that we very much hope you will participate in. So before we ask the panelists to come into our carbon living room and tell us their secrets, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Professor Peter Thrower, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the Carbon Journal. Peter.
It was 19 years ago that we had the Carbon Conference, one of the first conferences actually to be held in this new building with no other buildings around it. We wondered what the university was doing, building a place like this out in the wilds, but we had the Carbon Conference here, and it was a big success. And we did at that time, as Bob has just mentioned, present the first carbon medals. And I have one here because I thought you might like to see it from a distance. It's quite heavy, it's bronze, and it was designed by a lady in conjunction with my input, and I must say I had a lot of input on it because she didn't know anything about carbon or anything like that. And since it was for fullerene, she made one side fullerenic. So if you look at it, you'll see there are pentagons and hexagons on there, and it's like the cap of a fullerene, which has just sort of been cut off and then squashed a little bit, because after all, it's a metal. We couldn't have something spherical, you know. And on the other side, what have we got on the other side? Well, we have graphene. So it's quite appropriate that this is given for the first time to somebody from the fullerene world, and now we're giving it to somebody from the graphene world. And by the way, the lady who designed it and made them still lives very close to State College, only about 3 or 4 miles away, and she's presently serving on the by presidential appointment, and I don't mean university president, I mean Obama appointment. She's serving presently as a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee on Coinage. So she is responsible to some extent for any new US coins that are produced. And so those of you who have the medal, you will know that it is being produced by somebody, or has been produced by somebody who has international, or national certainly, recognition. And she has also won an award for medal design from the International Society, which was presented at their meeting in Finland a few years ago. So she's, up there. In 1960, 2 things happened that were very important to the carbon world, as it turned out, I think. The first, I graduated. And I had absolutely no intention of working in carbon. I went to work, and they told me, you're going to work in carbon and graphite materials. And I said, no, I'm not. And they said, yes, you are. And what could I do? I was there, I'd bought a house, I was settled, and I worked on carbon and graphite materials, and here I am, 50-some years later, still working on carbon and graphite materials. The other thing I think that happened in that year, maybe unknown to a lot of you, was that there was a very significant paper, in my mind, in my opinion, published in Journal of Applied Physics by a man called Roger Bacon, and Roger had made some graphite whiskers, which turned out to be scrolls, and he had measured the Young's modulus, he had measured the tensile strength of these, and these results were reported, and they really demonstrated that there was the possibility of making something filamentous that was really strong and rigid from carbon. And of course, in those days, you remember when I graduated, I don't know whether the word carbon fiber had been coined, but certainly graphene hadn't been coined. And we've been through a lot of changes. No other element, I think we can claim rightly, has seen the changes that we have seen. The development of the carbon fiber. I remember seeing my first carbon fibers. They cost $400 a pound, and they weren't very good, but they were the commercial ones available at the time. And now you can buy something far superior for $20 bucks a pound, and the world has changed so much. And we've seen fullerene, and now we've seen nanotubes, and now we've seen graphene. And just as a little secret, the very, very first experiment I did when I went to work at Harwell, and this is not a lie, the very, very first experiment I did was to take a single crystal of graphite and a roll of Scotch tape and pull it apart until I got something that was thin enough to see through. Now, how many layers it was, I have no idea. And I don't have that original dispenser for the Scotch tape, so I can't denote it to the Nobel Museum as our colleagues have. But yes, that was the very first experiment. I was so close to a Nobel Prize, God. And I'd only graduated 6 months earlier. Anyhow, that's the history that I have seen in carbon. So I will turn the floor back to Bob, and I believe we are going to start with a video. Is that right?
Thank you. So thank you, Peter. Finally, before we start, there is one member of the panel that we all hoped would be here, but sadly could not. So Sir Harry Kroto passed away recently, and we thought if we can't have Harry here, maybe we can at least have a sense of Harry's presence. And to that end, we'd like to take a few minutes to show a brief video on Harry's life. This is a special video that was shown at the workshop on Sunday, but Mauricio and Lubicia felt we wanted the whole conference, the full carbon community assembled here today, to see this video before we start the formal panel.
I was once your age and younger. I didn't want to be a scientist. What I really wanted to be was Superman. I couldn't fly. I did gymnastics and played tennis. We got to the finals a couple of times. And I acted in a play, Henry V at school. Ian and I were in the same year at school, fantastic actor. He came out to stay with us a couple of years ago in Florida, did a fantastic one-liner. The greatest Shakespearean actor of my generation. And then I met Rick Smalley. Really, I just happened to go to Rice University. Bob Cole invited me. Rick had developed a fantastic apparatus where he vaporized with a laser to fuse metal clusters. And I suggested choosing a graphite, and maybe we'll produce the carbon chains and create an atmosphere like a star, like IRC 10-16. With Jim Heath, Sean O'Brien, and Yuan Liu, we got a fantastic result, totally unexpected, of C60. And what we've set up at Florida State is the GeoSet program. We use capture station technology. We put the video in one and the PowerPoint in the other one. I'm heavily involved in GeoSet, Global Educational Outreach for Science, Engineering and Technology, which we're doing from here, and we're getting students, undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, teachers, recording short presentations on the things that they are passionate about. Geosat.info is our gateway site, and geoset.fsu.edu is one of about a dozen sites. We've got sites now in Japan, the UK, in Croatia, in Brazil, and Spain. You never know where your wandering will go. And university is the best place to explore avenues of your creative potential. You'll meet people from all over the world if you do science. Basically creating a cache of material for them, for others to see.
What I think is the really important thing about Harry is what sort of person he was. There are lots of famous scientists in the world, but he was a really passionate scientist and really keen on communicating science and how exciting science is to young people.
That's what is wonderful about science. It's the same wherever you are. It's not everything else. It's different from everything else. Everything else is man-made, and it differs from where you are.
It was a brochure advertising the chemistry course at the University of Sussex. It consisted of a map of the United Kingdom with a Bunsen burner on each of the cities where there was a chemistry department, which was okay, but the thing that was mischievous is that only the Bunsen burner on Brighton, University of Sussex, was alight.
I used to draw. These are the kids up there. Keep drawing because you never know how useful it will be. At university, I started to do posters and various other things.
All of us are going to really miss Harold Kroto, Sir Harold Kroto, who always liked to just be called Harry. He was such an amazing guy, and I would never have met him, I'm sure, this incredible Nobel Prize-winning chemist. If it hadn't been for Starmus, and because of Starmus we were able to interact and have fun together, but also I saw him in action. One of the most extraordinary lecturers I've ever seen, working with his PowerPoint and his computer and going in and out of programs live as he speaks. It was just dazzling beyond belief, so I hope some of that's on record, on video somewhere. But as a human being, what an amazing guy, and a sad loss to the scientific community and a sad loss to humanity. But boy, he did some great stuff. We will miss you, Harold.
We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death. The quest for a war-free world has a basic purpose, survival. But if in the process we learn how to achieve it by love rather than by fear, by kindness rather than by compulsion, if in the process we learn to combine the essential with the enjoyable, the expedient with the benevolent, the practical with the beautiful, this will be extra incentive to embark on this great task. Above all, remember your humanity and forget the rest.
Thank you, Mauricio and Lubisha, for that. Okay, let us begin our panel discussion. And I would like to bring up the medalists one by one, and this is in chronological order, not by age, but by the date of the awarding of your carbon medals. And so our first awardee would be Professor Robert Curl, Professor Emeritus of Chemistry at Rice University, born in Alice, Texas, and there's an interesting story there. A winner of the 1996 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, a carbon medal recipient in 1997 for pioneering work on fullerenes. Professor Curl, please come up. Midred Dresselhaus, Millie. Professor Emeritus in Physics and Electrical Engineering at MIT, and the first ever female institute professor at MIT, born in Brooklyn, New York, recipient of the Carbon Medal in 2001 for broad contributions in the field of carbon science and especially carbon nanotubes. Millie, please come up. Don Bethune, physicist, spent his career at IBM Almaden's Research Center in San Jose, California. He's a local boy, born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, recipient of the Carbon Medal in 2004 for pioneering work on carbon nanotubes, especially single-wall nanotube discovery. Don, please come up. Professor Moribundo Endo, Professor of Engineering at Shinshu University, born in the Nagano Prefecture. This is the site of Carbon 2008. And I believe Professor Endo was either born or raised in Suzaka City, which was a site that we visited during Carbon 2008, if you all recall. He received the Carbon Medal in 2004 for pioneering work on carbon nanotubes. Professor Endo. And of course, Professor Konstantin Novoselov is a professor in the School of Physics and Astronomy, possibly also astrology, no, astrology also possibly, at the University of Manchester. He was born in Russia, winner of the Nobel Prize in 2010 for pioneering work on graphene and the carbon medal here at this meeting in 2016. Konstantin, please come. So we're going to start this discussion with some opening statements to seed some ideas in the group. And Professor Curl, in the same chronological order, we're going to ask Professor Curl to give an opening statement. And I believe he's going to use some slides to do that.
Should I get up or sit here?
Up to you.
Well, I'm not used to talking sitting down.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Yeah.
Okay, so at least I can see what's coming up. Nothing.
All right, we have looks. We have.
So I don't have to do that. Anyway, that's just the beginning side. So the point of this talk is, what is the future of carbon materials? Okay, this is what we're all here gathered about. And so strictly what my opinion of what we're doing is shown by this American sage. It's on the next slide. Who, it's my belief that we can not predict the future, that often the most interesting things come about very suddenly, very accidentally, and we just can't predict what the new developments will be in carbon research. One thing I am convinced of is that it's going to be a big deal. This is a big room. It's filled with people all doing carbon research. I don't think you can all be wrong. And I personally am convinced that it has a great future because when you think about the flexibility with which carbon can bond to itself by single, double, triple bonds, the kind of structures that can result in their potential use is fabulous. So what am I in particular interested in? I think that's what's next. Well, first of all, I have to talk about what people want to do. Some people want to do science. That's what I want to do, develop new knowledge. Other people want to do something useful. Strange idea. But both groups have something to contribute. The new knowledge produces new invention produces the tools to develop new knowledge. So it's these two things go hand in hand. Now I guess I can tell you what I'm interested in doing. I'm on the science side. Next slide. I'm mostly interested, the only thing I've actually worked on here is trying to understand and model fullerene formation. And we published one paper about maybe 7 or 8 years ago in this area. And I'm convinced that my paper must be at least partially wrong. But the story is far from being complete. And what I think is most important is actual real experimental data where fullerenes are produced under controlled conditions of concentration, pressure, and temperature so that one can have the parameters that have to be satisfied. These two quantities, if you think about amorphous carbon, we know nothing really about amorphous carbon if you get down to it. I mean, we have all these different aspects, charcoal, vitreous carbon, probably the properties of fullerene soots are different. And some of the amorphous carbon will convert to graphite much more readily than others. And then, so I don't work on this because it's too hard. And I'm not sure, therefore, I recommend something that's really too hard. This is too hard. The other aspect is understanding interactions between the electrons and vibrations in conducting and superconducting carbon materials. I don't work on this because it's too hard for me. It may be, this is something, if you're smart, you could make some significant contributions to. Anyway, those are some of the items that I think is interesting to put up for discussion. Going back to the modeling of fullerenes, we do need data, and I wanted to draw your attention to one particular study. Next slide, please. And that is this work done at TDA, the company in Colorado, Mike Alford and Michael Diener. I don't know the other gentlemen, but they're obviously important. This provides us with more information about the distribution of fullerenes and a comparison between the fullerenes in arc soot and the fullerenes in combustion soot. And the amazing thing is that in the combustion soots, the ones that come from frontier carbon, they contain, according to this, more than about 70% fullerenes. So, and they were able to extract them in this work. So I draw your attention to this if you ever get interested in this subject. I believe that's all I really have to say. Is there another slide? I don't think so.
Yes.
There is? Oh, things that in the technology side, Smalley dreamed of electric cables made out of armchair single-wall carbon nanotubes. And he decided that he wanted to work on this in 1993. Before that, he had never worked on the same project for more than 2 years. In 1993, he decided to work on this. He told me about it. I said to myself, that sounds very hard. So he spent the rest of his life until he died in 2005 pursuing this dream, because this would have enormous practical implications if you could find an economical way to produce this particular material, because you could replace all of the high-tension lines in the whole country and around the world. This has not been achieved. Progress has been made. We can talk about the progress later. And then the other thing is that, notice I have a rice bias, you have to understand that. Jim Tour's development of a material to suppress the toxic effects of oxygen when a clot is broken in the brain. You have somebody has a stroke, it's a clot stroke. The doctors do everything they can to open up the blockage. It's actually in an artery, sorry. And then they comes in with fresh oxygen, which is extremely toxic. And Jim had a scheme involving, this is PEG, we all know about pegylation, and this is essentially a hydrophilic carbon clusters is what he calls it. I can tell you about what it is, but it does kill oxygen radicals, which cause the toxic effect, and I can talk about why it's toxic later. Anyway, thank you very much.
Well, I guess I'm the next speaker, but I don't have any slides. And I can summarize my contributions. In 1950, I was a student, like many people in the audience. I didn't know anything about anything. I went to college to be a school teacher, and I was lucky to get there. But teachers are very important. And while I was a student, I met Rosalind Yallow, and she was teaching at Hunter College, which is a teacher's college, because she couldn't get a job. So two unlikely persons met, and we became lifelong friends. You might know her. She got the Nobel Prize for immunoassay, and her Nobel Prize was in 1977, and I guess that might have been before your Nobel Prize. Yes. But anyhow, I was invited to the ceremony and all that stuff. So that's how I got introduced and to that thing. So 1950, I was a student. 1960, I started my independent career. And then I moved from something to carbon. That's when I wrote my first paper on carbon, 1960. Unbeknown to me, almost the same time as I got into carbon, there was another guy, he's not here today, but he wrote a paper in 1960, and I have a copy of it in German, which I can read, so I read it. And he has one layer of carbon. Now, it's true that many people did what, I guess Peter Thrower was saying, scratching graphite and peeling it off with Scotch tape. We all did that. That was the only way we knew how to make carbon. So that was old days. But 1960, I guess, I got into it, and there was nobody interested in the field. So the first 3 years, I think there were 3 papers that I know of that were published on the topic. And if you look at the name, it was yours truly. 1970, I was by that time a full professor at MIT, university-wide professor. And so I had students from many different departments. And very shortly thereafter, Debbie Chung came. DDLC were her initials. I used to mark things DDLC for her. She's in the audience. She's been contributing to this conference very broadly. And her thesis was the first thesis on graphite intercalation compounds. And I worked in that field until the 1990s, in fact. So thank you, Debbie, for introducing me to that topic. So intercalation compounds are one-dimensional, two-dimensional. The next decade, that was 1970s, is 1980s. And well, I was a good friend of Rick Smalley, so you might not know that, but I was. And we used to go to Washington frequently and talk about various things. And so I was very familiar with the fullerenes as they were developing. And we were together in Washington, actually, somewhat later, because he had a very big influence on me. In 1980, I met Professor Endo Sensei, as we call him. And it was in 1980 that you came to the US for the first time that I know of. And we had a conference at Provincetown when we met each other. And I went up to him and I said, "Your talk was beautiful. I'd love to have a sample and maybe we can make some measurements on your sample." Remember that? Yeah. And so that started me off on carbon fibers. And so I was working on that. And I even wrote a book on it, but I wrote the book in English. And you're Japanese, so I needed a close by collaborators, and they in fact told me to write the book, so they got into the act. So that happened in 1988. We published the book, and in 1990, Rick Smalley invited me to a conference and in Washington, where we started talking on the table about what would happen if you made some nanostructures out of carbon. So I was talking about making the carbon fibers smaller.